Whenever a national emergency or crisis hits, the governing class reaches for a familiar reflex. They gather at a podium, declare an emergency, and announce a multi-billion or trillion-dollar funding package. This has trained us to measure a government's success by the size of the check it writes. We have been conditioned to believe that a larger budget is synonymous with a solved problem, regardless of what happens next. To see if that logic holds up, we are conducting a structural audit of recent American crises, comparing the massive financial inputs against the actual human outputs. The initial data suggests a structural breakdown. We are seeing the start of an input-output collapse, where the primary obstacle appears to be a failure of execution rather than a lack of taxpayer resources. Pandemic relief provides our first clear look at the machine. Across 2 administrations, the federal government distributed nearly $790 billion through the Paycheck Protection Program to keep small businesses running. The Small Business Administration was tasked with the oversight, but in the rush to move capital, basic administrative controls were loosened or bypassed entirely. The resulting output was a historic windfall for bad actors. Federal watchdogs now estimate that 17% of all funds across these SBA programs, over $200 billion, flowed to coordinated crime rings, con artists, and fake businesses. The losses extended into the unemployment system, where another $191 billion was lost to improper claims. Investigators found that by skipping identity checks and income verification, the system became a target for individual thieves and organized networks alike. Despite aggressive enforcement actions by the Department of Justice, the recovery rate remains incredibly low. Federal agencies has managed to claw back a meager 3 to 6% of the missing money. By abandoning oversight in the name of speed, the governing class essentially turned the safety net into a treasury for crime rings and identity thieves, bypassing the public they were meant to serve. The collapse scales down to the local level as well. In New York City and Los Angeles, taxpayers provide a combined $5.3 billion every year to address homelessness. This chart contrasts the funding against the result. New York City now spends an average of $81,000 a year for every single unsheltered person, yet the population on the streets has not seen a corresponding decline. In Los Angeles, the issue is bureaucratic gridlock. The city spends upwards of $600,000 to build a single unit of affordable housing, and administrative delays have left $500 million in voter-approved funds sitting unspent. Federal border policy creates further downstream strain. Over the last 4 years, a net interior addition of roughly 6 million undocumented individuals has entered the United States. This policy forces a massive physical output onto local infrastructure. Housing that population requires 2.4 million apartments, the equivalent of 1.5 years of all new U.S. residential construction, and 600 million gallons of daily water usage. In these cases, taxpayers are hit twice. First, the money they provide is swallowed by administrative middlemen, and second, they are forced to absorb the staggering physical and financial costs of federal policies that lack a plan for execution. The audit of our core institutions tells a similar story. Since the 1990s, U.S. healthcare spending has jumped from $900 billion to $5.3 trillion, now consuming 18% of the entire national economy. This line graph tracks the result. Instead of linear growth, American life expectancy flatlined for a decade before a sharp drop in 2020. We also see a widening health span deficit. Americans now spend nearly 13 years of their lives managing chronic diseases. The education sector reflects this same pattern. Decades of increased federal funding and strict accountability laws were implemented with the goal of pulling student achievement forward. But the testing data shows a net neutral result. Modern high school seniors are exiting the K-12 system with roughly the same foundational math and reading proficiencies as the generation that graduated in 1990. In our most heavily funded sectors, massive budget increases have effectively bought us stagnation. The audit shows that despite trillions in new spending, the system has nullified the gains of the early 2000s, leaving today's outcomes right where they stood 30 years ago. When we bring these data points together, the failure is visual. A steep line for taxpayer spending has completely disconnected from our flatlining national results. The space between these lines is the governance deficit, representing trillions lost to fraud, bloat, and the inability to deliver. The The governing class has mastered the art of budget allocation, but it has lost the competence required to actually solve the problems it claims to address. We cannot continue to allow success to be measured by the size of the budgets passed. If we don't demand results, the gap between what we pay and what we receive will only continue to grow. Until the system is held accountable for its physical outputs, the American taxpayer will continue to fund their own decline. It is not a resource problem, it is a governance problem.